Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. High fuel costs are impacting everyone. One industry is being hit particularly hard. Truckers are seeing costs skyrocket as diesel costs have rose 41% since the start of America and Israel's war with Iran. Jim Berg is the president of his own trucking company in Warren. He's been moving steel in the trucking business for decades. While costs are rising really fast, he says as of right now, he's only been modestly impacted.
Fuel costs are increasing really fast right now. How is that impacting your company?
It's impacting us moderately right now. We have fuel surcharge numbers in place. These are negotiated agreements, escalation and de-escalation of prices between our customers. So they know at the price of fuel what they're paying for their loads. And as fuel goes up, they pay more. As fuel goes down, they pay less. So, but we're still being affected to some degree with the business.
Are you concerned? Are you moderately concerned? Where are you at emotionally right now?
I'm concerned that ongoing high prices for gasoline and diesel are going to drift into the economy, and it's going to slow down the overall growth of GDP, and that's going to affect the larger economy. I hate to use the R word, but that's on my mind.
Recession,
mm-hmm. and sentiment of people. Sometimes you just feel good about yourself. You go about your day. If one thing makes you feel bad, it's a downer, and I'm afraid that this can end up being a downer to the psyche of the American consumer.
Yeah, the vibes matter.
Yes, there's no question.
Have you experienced anything like this in terms of fuel costs, starting to rise pretty quickly? I know you got into the trucking game in the 80s, and of course, we had an oil crisis in the 70s. Have you experienced anything like this of prices going up pretty quickly in a short period of time during your time as a trucking owner?
2009, 10, or it was probably earlier than that, 7, 8. We hit $5 a gallon then. Oil was close to $1.40 a barrel at that time. So, we had to realign our fuel surcharge and make sure that we were getting what we needed as the price of fuel went up. Certainly easier to do business when fuel is lower. On top of that, we have to carry the cost of fuel from the time we pay for it to the time our customer pays us is a length of time that we have to have reserves and capital to back that.
How does it change other aspects of your company outside of just trying to sort of, meet the market where it's at? Do you have to, lay off some people for a time? Do you have to send out fewer trucks? Do you have to change some of your operations? How does it work?
We're always looking at keeping our costs down, all the time. That's just good business. Don't waste money. So, don't idle a truck longer than we need to. Don't make a run that we don't need to. Be focused on cost. But when it gets this level, it's in operations where operations is now saying, they're not going to deadhead a truck a certain amount of miles that they would have, at cheaper fuel. Because there is that cost to us, so it's on everybody's mind. We're focused on cost all the time, but the heightened urgency of this weighs on our minds as well.
Yeah.
As far as layoffs, I don't see that. As long as our volumes are high, where they're at now, we're not going to cut headcount in any department because we need the people for the business we have.
You move steel. To the best of your understanding, is your company impacted by fuel costs in a way that is at all different from any other trucking company?
Not really, because as long as our formula for the surcharge equals the miles per gallon that we get, if I was hauling paper towels with a freight box, my fuel surcharge table might be based on 7 to 7.5 miles per gallon. But being we haul steel and we're multi-axle heavy gross, we're getting 5.5 to 6 miles per gallon. So we need more of that money sooner. But that's because we're hauling more product. So as long as we have those, it doesn't matter what segment, fuel is still a number one or number two cost to any trucking operation.
You started your company in the 80s, and I wanted to ask you, why did you get into trucking in the first place?
It's just something that I like to do. My family business was in the packaged ice. They got bigger trucks as the company grew. I was driving those. They ended up with a semi one year, and I drove that and liked it. And a year and a half later, I bought my own truck. Immediately started hauling steel and really liked the whole job. I liked the physical activity of climbing up and down on equipment, chaining steel down, being active, and then the driving element as well. I still enjoy driving.
We were talking earlier, and you have a somewhat romantic view of it. And I know, trucking can be grueling. It can be long. You can be away from family and loved ones or routine for quite some time. Tell me about why you like it so much and why you gravitated towards it.
There were small challenges along the way that I focused on. Like either how many loads was I going to make or haul that week, or how much revenue was I going to make, or how could I focus on my fuel economy? What could I do to get it better? These little things that drove me, the micro sense of the day. That's really was my motivation. Because after you've seen every beaver dam from Detroit to Sault Ste. Marie, Ontario on I-75, I-75 gets pretty boring. So it's other things that I thought of to keep my mind active.
What's the craziest thing you've seen while you're on the road?
A moose. Those are big. I slowed down because I saw it on the side of the road, and as I went by, we were eye to eye, and I was sitting, up in my truck. That was unique.
Did you get out of your car to see the moose?
No, not. He was staying on the side of the road, and I was staying in my lane. I just slowed down so in case he jumped in front of me or another moose was around, because they could take your truck out, no question.
How has the industry changed since you got into it decades ago?
I don't think there's anything that hasn't changed. From the type of tires that we ran then that we're using now, transmissions, engines, power, the comfort of the vehicle, the satellite radio in trucks. I mean, it's everything that you can have in your personal car now is largely available in a big truck. So nothing has stayed the same. The weight that we could haul has increased largely through innovation of building equipment that is lighter but just as strong. Air ride suspensions that make the equipment smoother to operate. Every single aspect of trucking has changed. Even the business part, when I was trucking, if I ended up in a place that I, hadn't been before and I didn't have contacts, you'd basically drive to the truck stop and look at the TV screen where they would have loads displayed, and then you'd call that number to find your next load. Now, in those cases, everything's on the internet. You just, stop your truck while you're getting unloaded, look at your phone, and then line up your next load that way.
So things have become smoother. They've become more efficient.
No question, and more predictable.
Mm-hmm.
Especially when there's freight moving. When freight's slow, then it takes all, that's more challenging. But when we're busy, it's really enjoyable.
Yeah.
It's solving the customer's problems. Another thing that we like to do.
Coming back to the fuel hikes, I guess I'm wondering if you and other trucking companies are pushing the current administration to end this war. I mean, it's certainly America and Israel's wars in Iran that have caused the price hikes. Is this a focus at all for folks in the industry? Is there any kind of movement, or is the priorities elsewhere?
I don't think there's a big movement for that. As a business owner, I'm sort of putting everything in a blender and saying, okay, what was my choice before the election, and what did I get now? And if I got higher oil prices now instead of higher taxes, which I was told I would get, with the other camp, then I'm still ahead of the game.
Jim Berg is the president of the James Berg Trucking Company in Warren. He spoke with producer Sam Corey. It's the Metro on WDET. I'm Robin Vincent. Detroit is known for its cars, of course, but it's also known for creating a lot of space for those cars. There is a real push from Detroit planners to change that, though. Last year, the city made a series of truck route restrictions in Southwest to prevent big trucks from navigating neighborhood blocks. Producer Sam Corey spoke with Wayne State's Eric Bettis about why Detroit has wide roads and whether that's shifting.
So Detroit has been narrowing some of its roads over the past decades. I'm thinking particularly about Grand River, Livernois, and Kercheval. First, Do you find that it's true that Detroit has been on an active path to narrow a lot of its roads?
Generally, yeah. There has been kind of a concerted effort by the city of Detroit to really expand its network of really well-designed streets. It actually has a program that has specifically been stood up for the purpose of redesigning streets with the intention of putting them on what we call road diets, taking away lanes and adding other amenities that work better for other road users.
What program in particular are you thinking about?
The one that is here in Detroit specifically is called Streets for People. That is basically just a Detroit-specific version of this much broader concept that we call complete streets. So the way that it works here in Detroit is basically identifying streets that are ripe for some level of redevelopment, be it for economic development purposes, because safety concerns are there, or because they want to tap it into a broader, say, cycling network. So identifying those roads and designing new street features for them that provide greater amenities for people besides just drivers.
How is the project of creating complete streets, being more inclusive of pedestrians, cyclists, how is that different here in Detroit than in other cities across the country?
I think that pretty much any large-scale urban planning or urban design endeavor is going to look pretty different here than it will in most other cities, especially non-Rust Belt cities. In the case of Detroit, we have so many roads that have excess capacity, meaning too many lanes, because they were designed for an earlier era when we had obviously more people. And because of the fact that people still live along these thoroughfares, but they don't have the same level of traffic volume, it seems that the city of Detroit has deemed that there's a lot of room to make some changes that provide extra amenities for them, but can also capitalize on the fact that, again, these streets don't carry the same capacity that they used to. And so instead of letting there be all this excess asphalt that has to be maintained and resurfaced every year, meanwhile, alongside that, we have narrow sidewalks that are uninviting for pedestrians. It makes it so that we can basically shift that, bring more space for pedestrians and cyclists into the mix while taking unnecessary lanes of traffic away.
I'm just curious what, to your understanding, has been the reaction from residents in the Grand River and Livernois and Kercheval area about the narrowing of those streets. How has it impacted the local economies? How have people been reacting to that change?
I'd say it's largely positive, but definitely a mixed bag, as will be any kind of urban planning intervention. I think generally speaking, it's pretty hard to argue with roads that feel, in most cases, safer for pedestrians and cyclists. And there's been a positive kind of association between areas that have increased walkability and increased commercial activity, because it's just more pleasant to be in those spaces, to walk around and to browse or to hang out with friends, versus bigger, wider roads with fast traffic that have more pollution and more things like that. Those areas are generally not as pleasant to spend time on as a non-driver. So there's definitely that side, but also, from the driver perspective, in some cases, I'm sure it's frustrating. In some cases, these streetscape projects have required removing some number of parking spots in order to create some of the features that they have. Sometimes they'll either have to shift the position of them or get rid of some parking spots altogether. And of course, removing lanes of traffic, say, for example, down from 3 lanes down to 2, that would be frustrating if you are a regular commuter that is used to just zooming along this space, going 50 miles per hour in a zone that was never meant for that. Then all of a sudden you lose 1 lane of traffic, and then the traffic is going more slowly. And so as a driver, I can imagine that's frustrating for many, but as a cyclist or a pedestrian, much more conducive to a comfortable environment.
I think the strongest argument for not narrowing lanes is kind of what you were referring to is, listen, Detroit doesn't have great public transit. People get around by car. Certainly not everybody. Plenty of people can't afford a car and car insurance is high, but many people get around by car. And by making these changes, it's making it harder to get around by car. In the cases where you're in favor of narrowing roads, what do you say to someone with that perspective?
I would say this, because the fact that the city of Detroit, just as much of the state of Michigan has, there is what some would call an excess of roads. There's no shortage of ways to get from point A to point B. Now, granted, there can be some issues with very rapidly moving from the western part of town to the eastern part of town. And in some cases, if you're trying to get from one part of town, say from near downtown to farther up to like 6 Mile or 7 Mile without being on the Lodge Freeway and relying purely on surface roads, yes, that can take a long time. So the frustration could be there for those that maybe avoid the freeways and rely on these wider radial roads like Michigan and Gratiot and Woodward to get around. That frustration is natural. However, the benefits that can come for everyone else, as walkers, as cyclists, those benefits also will be realized by them if they ever get out of their car and choose to engage in the recreation or the retail along these thoroughfares as well. So while I can be sympathetic to someone who purely drives and has very little interest in getting out of their car at any point, they will likely be able to experience a much different and more comfortable feeling in the event they do decide to interact with the city outside of their car. One really, really important aspect of this that should be understood is safety. There is, for anyone who drives in Detroit, a tendency for drivers to drive well above the speed limit on any given road, surface road, highways, you name it.
Yeah, I've experienced that.
And this is a real issue. If you're on Lodge, the odds are you risk getting rear-ended if you drive below 70 miles per hour, despite the posted speed limit of 55. More narrow roads do create a kind of an unconscious perception of constricted space, which really has some positive impacts in the sense that drivers tend to slow down. They tend to observe the area around them more, both out of a concern for hitting someone else, but also just because the fact that the space around them, the shops around them, the people around them are so much closer that there's just a natural tendency to pay more attention to what you're going through. So drivers who are driving on these newly narrowed streets are probably getting reacquainted with what's actually on display in those places.
It changes people's behavior in that it connects them to other people in other places in a way that it otherwise wouldn't.
Yeah, absolutely.
You're listening to The Metro on WDET, Detroit Public Radio. My name is Sam Corey, and I'm speaking with Eric Bettis. He's an assistant professor of urban studies and planning at Wayne State University. We're discussing Detroit narrowing some of its roads over the last decade and what that means for people here in the city. Professor Bettis, I want to talk a little bit about how we got here in the first place. We have a lot of wide roads. Of course, the city was developed for a lot more people, around 2 million. Why does Detroit have such wide roads in the first place? Is it because we were developing around cars for more people, or are there other reasons to that?
Because of Detroit's amazing location as a shipping lane and as a hub for freight, it was kind of incumbent upon the new designers of the city. That would be mostly Augustus Woodward. He had a very large hand in that redevelopment process. It was kind of incumbent upon them to build with the quick movement of goods in mind. And I believe at that point was when they started to change the width of the roads to something that was a little bit wider. Traditionally, they'd been large enough for accommodating people on foot and carriages, maybe the occasional cart holding large amounts of timber or something else. But in the era of railroad and larger scale industry, it was kind of important to be able to create roads that would allow for the movement of large amounts of goods.
So we've talked a little bit about all the benefits of narrowing roads, the big ones being about safety, creating more activity in particular areas, creating more connection, boosting the local economy. Are there stretches of roads in Detroit that you think should remain wide, that you think it really serves a distinct purpose to keep them wider?
Yeah. In my kind of perception of where the greatest utility of narrowing roads would be, it would be in spaces where there's a lot of potential benefit of promoting greater walkability and greater bikeability, places that already have a lot of potential to have an explosion of retail and commercial activity. However, there are parts of the city that are either just badly designed for that or have not been known for that. And particularly along the larger radial roads, there are sections where there's not a lot of commerce built up already, and there's probably limited potential for that to be the case. And I think in those areas that have traditionally just been traversed kind of as quickly as possible in your vehicle, I think that in most cases, those areas, it's almost anathema as a transportation planner, that's a transit advocate to say such things. But generally speaking, if there's not a lot of need to increase bikeability or walkability in a space, then I don't think that there's much wrong with leaving those roads wider and allowing for greater traffic flow and a higher level of service to provide what we call higher throughput, meaning getting more cars through a space more quickly. But there's nothing inherently wrong with a wide road as long as it is not stifling greater walkability, bikeability, transit accessibility in a way that there is a pent-up demand for.
Well, let me ask you the question in reverse, which is, what are the places where there's the most pressing need to narrow the roads?
Well, I believe that many, if not most of those places have already been identified by the Streetscape project that the city of Detroit has been working on since probably 2018. If I had to think of a place myself that could benefit from more narrowing, I think stretches of MLK and stretches of Mack Avenue could benefit from being narrowed. Now, we do look at that as one of those fairly reliable east-west corridors that can get people kind of to traverse like Midtown. So it works for that purpose, but because of the fact that we have medical centers that line it, we have elementary schools, it is an area that does have a great deal of utility for folks, but is not as accessible as it could be for lower income people who rely on transit or who don't have access to cars.
We spoke before about Gratiot. Do you still think that's a place that's relevant for narrowing?
Yeah, I do believe that there are probably stretches of Gratiot that could benefit from narrowing. However, that would likely need to be done in concert with plans to redevelop parts of that thoroughfare.
Eric Bettis is an assistant professor of urban studies and planning at Wayne State University. He spoke with producer Sam Corey. It's the Metro on WDET. Coming up, public health researchers want doctors to prescribe patients social interaction to combat loneliness. We'll unpack how they plan to do that over the next hour. This is WDET-FM, Detroit Public Radio, your connection to news, music, and conversation. And this is the Metro. We'll be right back after the news from NPR and WDET.